Hello, and thank you for joining the second episode of Our Own Volition. I'm your host, Peyton Drozd Williams, and today I have my good friend and co-owner of Volition Comics, Aidan Glover, on. Aidan, say hi to everybody.
Hey, what's up, guys? I got a little bit of a sore throat, but don't mind my whack voice. It is me in the flesh.
And actually, as we speak, he is doing some digital art on his tablet. Can you tell everybody what you're working on?
I'm redoing a panel obsessively, kind of redoing a page that I didn't like. I thought it was the weakest page in issue 1 of Wingspan, so I just said, you know what? I don't often do this, but I was going to just redo the storyboard and draw it traditionally first, and then once I was satisfied with it traditionally, I was going to digitize it because I'm still learning how to draw digitally more organically. You know, I'm new to this thing. I'm learning.
Yeah, honestly, I would not know where to start, and that's honestly, there's a reason why I'm the writer and you're the artist, because I would not know where to start.
No, it's not fun. This is torture. I mean, it's very fun. It's very nice to reap the rewards, right? But and it's gonna feel very good once I'm done. But oh my gosh, I'm so obsessed right now. Everything has to be perfect. Every tiny little pixel just has to be perfect, and it's driving me mad.
Yeah.
Slowly.
Speaking of that obsession, I tell you what, guys, for hours on end. On his off days, on days that he works, even on break from work, this guy right here has been producing more than ever. He will not stop. So tell everybody, more about that obsession that you talked about.
Oh, well, okay. So some people don't like that I call it obsession, but I'm delusional, and I think this is a good thing. I think Poppy is also a little delusional. I think Professor North, Dr. North, is also delusional, in a way. In the Wingspan plotline, Poppy and Dr. North, they have these delusions of grandiose. Both of them have their own inner facades that they express to the world, and only one of them is healthy. But Poppy here, she also struggles with perfection, like I do, and really, my delusion is that I'm going to flesh out the whole Keepers universe, and I'm going to finish Wingspan Volume 1 and hopefully work on 2 and 3 eventually, especially 2 though, because you have what are they, the Bird Watchers?
Birdwatch, yeah, Age of Birdwatch, and more on that later because we're entering spoiler territory. But I guess we can tease that a little bit.
No,
that's completely fine.
Exciting.
We can tease that. I mean, but basically the idea for that is, when we get there. But let's just say, I'll just leave it at, not everybody's a fan of Wingspan. Not everybody's a fan of Wingspan and what superheroes are doing in this universe. So, she's gonna have her detractors, like anybody has detractors, right? Because something that the public likes to do more than build up a hero is tear one down. I mean, just think of how many celebrities have been canceled, for good reasons, bad reasons, justifiable, not justifiable, whatever. People just like tearing down somebody. But as far as that delusion that you mentioned, I mean, think of it this way. You described yourself as delusional, and you described some of these characters as delusional.
Yeah, a little bit.
Am I immune to that? I'm the one who wrote these characters, for heaven's sake. And think of I mean, oftentimes, certain attributes that you see in characters can be borrowed from or can be reflections of attributes of their creator. To varying extents, sometimes less, sometimes more so, depending on the character. But I mean, think of as a teen, as a young man, as I was coming up with these stories and these characters, I was delusional in my own way.
Yeah. That you could make a whole superhero universe, all out of on your own volition.
Right.
No pun intended.
Title drop right there. But, then obviously I wrote the first few books. It didn't really go anywhere, but that's completely okay that it was dormant for a few years because it just wasn't where it was supposed to be quite yet. But then Aidan came on board, and since then we've had a few intermissions, we've had a few pauses, we've had life happen, because life does happen. We're still human beings. Keep that in mind. But for the most part, we haven't looked back. We've just been moving forward. Sometimes we've slowed down a little bit, but we've still been moving forward. But
we had our pauses.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of, a nickel for not a nickel, but a shot for every time I say, speaking of. In this episode, I've probably said it like 5 times.
Lord.
I probably said it like 5 times already.
I can't drink with this sore throat. I can't do that right
now. Right. But as far as when you hopped on board, you want to tell everybody a little bit more about that day at 309 Coffee?
Oh, yeah. No, great coffee as always. God, I have drinking many mochas working and talking about Volition Comics and for Volition Comics as well. I was in the middle of actually turning the first volume of Kawaii Zombie into a sort of a prequel novel, you could call it. And I was kind of stuck. I didn't know what to do. I had writer's block. I was in territory that I just didn't know what I was doing. Horror is kind of fun to write, but then also you don't want to write the worst thing first, because then as the stakes build, how are you ever gonna amplify these stakes? And so I was just stuck, and we were just hanging out. Me and Peyton, we were we'd kind of bonded at our old job because we had basically asked out our exes on almost the same day. Both of them are exes. But, that was kind of the bonding moment between me and Peyton. You asked her out on this day, I'm only a day apart. We would keep track of each other's relationships as they grew and changed, and the relationship dynamics shifted, and they both ended in a terrible fire, but this is way too personal.
And then, actually, I'm gonna jump in there for a second and say, this guy right here, I couldn't stand him at first. Actually, when I met him, I could not stand this guy. Like most people, to be honest with you, I can't stand most people when I first meet them, especially at. It's funny, I've alluded to this job in the last episode, but I guess we'll just come out and say it because it was going to come up one way or another eventually. Thundercloud Subs is where we worked. Thundercloud Subs in Georgetown, Texas, sandwich shop. And
that's oddly specific. You could have just said a sandwich shop.
Okay, for all intents and purposes, just imagine it's Jersey Mike's or Witch
or Subway.
Or Subway or whatever. I mean, same thing. In theory, in practice, some differences, but just imagine that kind of backdrop, right? Aidan comes on board. I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? And I'm debating whether to bleep that. Probably not.
Who's really gonna care?
Who's really gonna care? I mean, what's our audience anyway here? We have no audience actually, so what does it matter? But in a few years, when we have 1 million subscribers, we're gonna look back and be like, ooh, in episode 2, you cussed, you dropped an F-bomb. Wow, you're so bold. We're gonna cancel you. Anyway, what was I saying? Right, okay. I couldn't stand it. I was like, who the hell is this guy? Get away from me. Because I hated life, I hated the job, I really hated the world. And granted, it wasn't just towards him, it was towards everybody, kind of, so it wasn't personal or anything like that. But then we got to talking, and we mentioned our relationships at the time, and as Aidan mentioned, that's kind of how things started to flow from there. And before we knew it, we started hanging out, started becoming friends. But really, it was fast forward a year that we had that conversation at 309 Coffee, and talked about comic books, talked about writing. I showed him my books, I told him about my books, and he was like, oh, we have to adapt this, we have to do this, right? That's when our friendship really kicked off.
That was like the moment it became permanent, right? Like, you went from being a coworker at my dead-end job to being like my business partner for life. Like it was like such a big switch. I was so excited that night that I designed Wingspan.
That was that night?
That was that night, yeah. No, and I think even after that like 2-hour hangout, we had a conversation once I went home that was like also like an hour. Do you remember that?
Something like that. Honestly, we could scroll back in Messenger and see the call log. I mean, I would not be surprised if that were the case.
Yeah, we had like a whole hour conversation like this very well could be real. This could happen. you know, like, yeah, it was exciting. It's always kind of been exciting, but the more people jump on, the more excited I get, because it's the more potential that we have to grow, you know, because everybody brings something new. I mean, what would I be without the keepers? And like, what would the keepers be without my art? Just the keepers. But like, without my art.
In the dustpan of history, to be honest, because you know, as I said, the first few books I've released, they weren't going anywhere, and at that point I kind of stopped caring, because at the time it had been a number of years since I last wrote anything, and at the time I really was past caring. I was laying low when it comes to all things creative. But it's funny because, as I recall, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, Aidan, but I think I remember that at the time, you know, you kind of felt similarly as far as your art, that we both brought that back out in each other.
Yeah, I wasn't really doing much art at the time. I was just coming back from college. You know, when we met, COVID-19 had just hit, and the world was kind of a mess. And
still
like,
is.
Nobody, yeah, it's been a mess.
Seen the headlines lately,
for
guys?
a very long time, but it was specifically an interesting mess. It was a different mess because like everybody was a little bit on edge, kind of like how they are now. But you know, that was almost the start of it in my adult life. And you know, I'm grateful for COVID, because if it weren't for COVID, I would have never met Peyton. You know, my job before Thundercloud actually closed down due to COVID. You know, which, you know, you heard a lot about that, you know, back in the day. You know, a lot of things were out of commission, businesses, people. But I'm grateful for COVID because it brought me and Peyton and me and a lot of other friends. Even my current girlfriend, you know, I mean, I met through Thundercloud, so I'm very grateful for it. Very, very grateful for it indeed.
Yeah, the corona pandemic, tell you what, it really was a dark time. And since then, it feels like history has not let up. It just keeps happening all around us, especially right now, which we don't have to get into it right now, but we all know what's going on. We all know what's going on. But as far as COVID, I mean, I had a lot of things happening around that time too. I mean, hey, you know, to be fair, I was a young man. You know, I had just turned 20 when it dropped, so, you know, it was a pivotal time in my life too, to have that rite of passage in such a historic moment. And it was also around that time, actually, that I became religious, funnily enough, which at the time, I'm not sure to what extent I was really conscious of, hey, this is how the dots connect. But now I look back and I actually I see those threads and how those things happening in my life, in the world, in current events in history, right? How, you know, all of that had a role to play in kind of shaping the man that I am now.
Yeah, they definitely, like, all the times you went through, implanted and reinforced who we are as human beings. And you know, we're all in this together, but I think the really interesting thing is the fact that me and you are pretty much the same age. So like,
basically,
we've basically grown up together in our early 20s. I mean, I've still, you know, I never wanted to grow up as a little kid. I kind of feel that way now, you know. But, you know, you do what you can.
Yeah, screw having to pay bills and vote and taxes and all sorts of stuff. But speaking of, OMG, speaking of, why do I keep saying speaking of, like, so many times? It's crazy. But I was actually looking for a segue like that. You know, you just mentioned when you were a kid. Of course, in the last episode, I shared a little bit about my background, where I came from, kind of my experience in life, and how I got to this moment. I was hoping that you could take the opportunity as well. Obviously, only share what you want to share. and like you can go on as long as you want, or you can keep it brief. Just floor is yours.
I'm refraining from pulling out my autobiography that I started like a month ago.
Go ahead. I mean, hey, listen, I can't judge because I've written snippets of mine.
Yeah, it all started in kindergarten. No. Let's see. No, well, I grew up like with my mom collected her sister's paintings. And her sister, my aunt Monica, she was a very surreal realist painter. And so I'd grow up with like these crazy paintings like all over the house. Mm-hmm. And like some of them were just like paintings of like costume parties or paintings of angels or paintings of like anything surreal. Like think about like, have you watched anything from Studio Ghibli?
A very long time ago, I did see Spirited Away. Not that I really remember much of it, other than it was good. I remember it being good, but
something weird like Studio Ghibli. Of course, she wasn't inspired by that. She was inspired by like a dream artist named Remedios, who like was a Mexican like artist in the 90s, 80s, and she actually took on his name, and she, like in a lot of her paintings, she titled her name with his signature, which is really, really like crazy, looking back on. I never knew that until I was older, but I grew up thinking like, I want to do what she does. I want to be that good, mm-hmm. And whenever we saw each other, she and not only her, but like most of my family like really encouraged my drawing. They would put my art on fridges, mm-hmm. even if it was utter trash and just total cringe. If it was like a painting, or not a painting, but if it was like a crayon of SpongeBob, my grandpa would be like, "That's pretty nice, pal. We're gonna throw that on the fridge."
Yeah. I mean, that encouragement, that recognition, even if it's in small ways, it goes a long way. Yeah.
It when it's from people you care about too, it really helps. It really helps solidify like, hey, I'm doing something okay. I'm decent at, it's nice to have some validation, and and then the whole Volition Comics thing, that's like a total fast forward from like childhood to right now, but like I'll get in between here in a sec. But in Volition Comics, being in that validation circle that is our Discord chat, it's really nice. It's really nice when I'm able to send unfinished work there, and then like Kaylee will give it a heart. Like that's really nice,
right?
Or anybody, feedback, all of that. That's really, it keeps me going.
I will admit, I'm just gonna out myself here, but I struggle with a degree of jealousy about that, actually, because obviously, I mean, I write quite prolifically. I have come up with probably dozens at this point. Stories, characters, worlds, right? Franchises, IPs, whatever you want to call it. And some are done, some are drafted, some are just outlines. And, there was this one day where I decided, you know what? I co-own a publishing company, right? So meaning I can publish whatever the hell I want. Meaning I can revive a whole bunch of old stuff of mine. And I was like, you know what? Let's make a channel for basically everything that I had that was old that I'm going to try to salvage. And in the span of an afternoon, I made 6 channels. And Aidan was like, what in the world are you doing? How are you going to be able to keep up with all this?
Well, if it's for later, I get that. But at the time, I didn't know.
And then, guess what? Not a soul. Okay, that's an exaggeration. But barely anybody said anything. I'm like, really? Yeah. and I'll post updates on the outline and whatnot, and Aidan will usually say something because he's supportive that way, but everyone else is just crickets.
I try. Yeah,
but that just goes to show that that writing, you have to really get into it and actually sit with and reflect on and digest and take in and take the time to do so for the writing, because art, it just strikes you. You see it, you have eyes, and it just strikes you. In a millisecond, it strikes you, and you have that impression. True. And you have that reaction. But writing, no. I mean, and reading,
You soak it in.
You have to soak it in over a period of time. So that's actually why I think the cliche or trope or whatever you want to call it, as far as don't judge a book by its cover, is actually very true.
That is true.
Every creative idea, I think, deserves a chance to stand on its own. And also it's important to keep in mind that it's all subjective anyway. So long our stories, so long our artwork, no matter the medium, so long it strikes one person, that's a victory in and of itself. Although the most important thing really is that you're expressing yourself and staying true to self in the process. So ultimately, I have some things in the pipeline that I'm really giddy and really excited about, and people aren't really feeling it, at least not quite yet. But that's okay, because I'm excited about it.
Right.
And
that's
like,
what matters.
Oftentimes what happens is, and we're definitely taking a whole tangent from your childhood, which we'll get back in a second.
Yeah, we'll get back. Yeah.
But what was I saying? Right. I lost my train of thought. Where does that happen?
It was you had such a beautiful spiel.
Oh yeah, right. I remember now. My bad, guys. I may edit this out. We'll see. This is just free flow now.
Yeah.
As you can tell, there's no structure here, but this is okay. This is just a conversation. Which honestly, we haven't really had a conversation like this in a minute, so it's good.
It's been a couple weeks, maybe a week.
Yeah, so it's good that we have this on tape so we can listen back. This is like our mini diary, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, I guess so.
Our joint diary together or something like that. But no, I was just gonna say that to me, my books, my stories, they play in my head as if they were movies. And something I shared in one of my shorts on Instagram was how when I write, I'm actually not writing it at all. Actually, the story is already written. It's already told. I'm just the vessel for that story. Yeah. So in so in that sense, I'm discovering it in real time in the exact same way that you, as a reader, are. Like this massive behemoth of a project I'm working on right now, which I will not say the title yet. I will not say it yet. More on that later, because it's going to take a while to get done, but Aidan knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
There are so many turns that take, so many plot twists, and like the rug is pulled out from under you. And when I get these ideas, or rather these ideas are channeled through me, I gasp, and I'm like my jaw drops. I have the same reaction that you as a reader would. I'm like, wow, really? That happened? Or that is happening right now? Good grief. And I go through all the stages of grief trying to process it, right? And I'm like, what do you mean? What do you want me to do? I'm writing this down because that's what happens. That's the story. What do you want me to do? Obviously, I'm probably oversimplifying a little bit. I do have to exercise some discretion, sure. Certain things I have to veto and weigh the pros and cons, this or this, there are different ways that this can go. But no, in a certain way, I do find that I am divinely inspired whenever I write. And I imagine it's the same way for you, Aidan.
Yeah, divine inspiration. When I'm adapting this, you mentioned that this whole thing is like a movie. It is my job to map out the cameras, the angles in the cinematography. So, by the time you get to the comic, it's the visual and I'm hoping that the literature is adapted correctly, and that's why I'm expanding so many pages, and this Wingspan project, it just gets longer and longer because I do want to pay tribute to it. I do want it to be good, and I want it, most importantly, I want it to reflect this young man's wonderful writing. I do. And I hope
young
it does.
Man's wonderful
You are
writing.
a young man.
Why do you
it is wonderful writing, and you are a young man.
It's interesting you phrase it like that when you're 2 months older, first of all. And then secondly, you always refer to me as an old soul, too. So, young man, what the heck?
Well, yeah, you're more of an old soul than I am. So, in a way, you're almost older, but you're not quite. You said something so beautiful earlier, and I couldn't help but think, would it be funny if this whole thing just wasn't recording the whole time?
Yeah, I mean, hence I keep checking my phone every few minutes, because as we're recording, after a couple of minutes or so, the screen will turn dark. So I have to unlock my screen and check, okay, is this a recording? But we're at 25 minutes, so we're doing pretty good.
Not bad.
We're doing pretty good. But, okay, so, back to you. And as I said, you can share as much as you want or as little. You don't have to tell your deepest, darkest secrets or anything, unless you want to.
Not necessarily.
If you want to share all your skeletons in the closet, okay, here you go.
No,
but I guess I would just ask you, which some of this I know, but I'm just asking you so you have an opportunity to introduce yourself to our listeners and to our fans. Not that we have very many fans yet, but we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there.
But when we have 1 million readers, they can scroll back to this and be like, okay, this is who Aidan Glover is.
Right.
Okay, so you're from Texas, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you've lived here all your life? Also, why am I phrasing that as a statement, not a question? I should be asking you, hey, where are you from?
I am a mere collection of every experience I've ever had. Just like you.
That doesn't even answer the question, but okay. All right.
We'll leave it a mystery. Yeah, I don't know. I'm from Austin, dude. I'm an Austinite. I'm a total hippie, crazy, young Austinite, young soul, punk rock, hippie Austinite. Yeah, that's who I am. But I want to leave Austin someday. But at my core, I'm pretty weird, bro.
It's funny you say that, because I was literally about to say the slogan for Austin is keep Austin weird.
Yeah.
Which would explain you.
It would explain me exactly. I don't.
But it would also explain me, because I've lived in this area for 12 years. Well, actually.
You don't even try to be weird. You just exist and are weird.
Yeah. Well, actually, excluding an intermission where I was out of state for 1.5 years, Tennessee, in case anyone's curious. Not that anyone is even listening to this. But, barring that intermission, actually, I've been in the Austin area for, let's do some quick math in my head, actually closer to 14 years, actually. Time flies. Okay, well... I will say, and this is something I was going to say earlier before we even started recording, but I'm glad that you had the foresight to do this already, was not have music on. Because this guy right here cannot stop playing music all day, which actually half the time, and by the way, we haven't mentioned this, but, just throwing this out there, we are roommates, right? I'm literally...
No, you mentioned that in episode 1.
I did. But I'm literally in his room right now, actually. But, he plays music all day, and half the time I'm like, here we go. Can I have silence? Although, I'm exaggerating a little bit, because...
No, it's loud.
I'm exaggerating a little bit. It's not that bad, because I have these noise-canceling headphones, which it's fine.
You shouldn't be forced to wear headphones just to have peace.
It's okay. But, the only reason I bring that up, actually, not that I'm tripping about it, I'm not. The only reason I bring it up is a segue to the kind of music we listen to.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned, if I were to quote, I'm kind of an old soul. I listen to funk and disco. That's a reference to episode 1.
Actually, did I mention that in episode 1?
Because you did.
Because I meant to, but I think I forgot to.
I heard that.
Oh, you heard that?
On the car.
As far as I like funk and disco music and soul as well.
Yeah. I listened to episode 1 today in preparation of this.
But yeah, I love Earth, Wind and Fire, Marvin Gaye, Al Green, The Whispers, Confunction. Let's see.
You introduced me to Confunction and Lakeside.
Lakeside, of course. The Gap Band, SOS Band. I love Midnight Star. Let's see. Donna Summer is great. Patrice Rushen is great. There's so many. There are so many. Funkadelic. OMG. How can I forget Funkadelic? One Nation Under a Groove. You know that song?
Look it up. I'm going to say I don't.
It's a great song. Look it up. I did not anticipate singing on this podcast today. Wow. But I guess that's what happens when you have a free flow conversation. But okay, so how about your music taste?
Oh, dude,
it's all over the place from what I've noticed, but at least what you usually default to.
Every day is like a different playlist. I guess I default to like just a general playlist. But I mean, apparently I have 242 playlists.
242. What?
Some of them over like 7 hours. Because 7 hours is the equivalent to 420 minutes.
Do you even have enough minutes in your lifespan to listen to all that?
That's what I'm saying is I rotate it. In like every playlist like reminds me of a different month of my life that I lived from when I was like either 16 to like 22. Or like even 23 to like 12. It's all over the place. I'm like Michael Jackson. No. I'm like Peyton. I like Michael Jackson. I don't know if it's controversial to mention that we like Michael Jackson.
Actually, I should have mentioned that a second ago because listen, of course I was I was narrowing it down to yes, funk and disco are my favorite genres. That is true. So all those artists and bands I just mentioned were that narrow. Well, not narrow because it's actually a pretty diverse set of genres. But, no, I mean, like the greatest entertainer of all time. Not just musician. Greatest entertainer that has ever lived, Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's controversial. I think that's just being a realist. Please. I mean, just...
he was the king of pop.
Just look at the number of lives he touched. Look at, the joy that he brought to millions of people. I mean, it can't be outdone.
No. You just can't do it.
And there will never be another one like that, so.
No, sir. He was probably one of my first artists that I really liked to listen to. And then after that, like my stepdad was into nu metal. So I got into that when I was younger, like Linkin Park or later on Deftones. And then I ended up moving in with a mutual friend of ours. He got me into like more heavier metal, like Gojira.
Wouldn't it be funny if I had that mutual friend on as a guest?
Yeah, that'd be hilarious because we were in talks of like him being the business manager when we first started. And then he gave us some tips and tricks, and that was it.
That's a whole saga, by the way, which we don't have to get into, him and I.
Not ever.
Not ever.
Not ever on this podcast.
Not ever.
We don't ever have to talk about the happenings.
But all the love to that guy. I mean, like, honestly, what I'm referring to is just some thundercloud drama, because really, that chapter of our lives could be a sitcom. It really could. It could be like a 5-season-long sitcom. It really could.
Yeah, it could.
Or a thriller. It could be a thriller. If you slap the right music on, the right editing, it could be a thriller. Well, by thriller I meant like, you know what I mean, like a psychological.
My
thriller.
voice is so scratchy right now. I can't even sing.
No, you're fine. But actually, it's funny because speaking of good old Jacob. He was actually instrumental in one business argument that we had back at Thundercloud, where it pissed everybody off to no end.
This is the Glaze thing, isn't it?
Yeah, they were like, please stop arguing about
Poor
this. Please.
Allison, she was like, shut up, y'all, please.
And basically, what it was is... obviously, we have the character Glaze from Bolivia. Now she's Afro-Bolivian. Her powers obviously are ice powers, right? And I always described her as having black hair. Okay, cool. Aidan, in some cover art at the time, made her blonde. I was like, what in the world? What do you think you're doing? I never said a word about blonde. What are you doing?
I think this whole discrepancy forced us to write contracts. Then and there, like it forced us to grow in a lot of ways. It was probably our first big clash.
It was a major,
like an ego clash too.
Yeah, but basically, I was like, okay, first of all, she cannot be naturally blonde. That's not going to happen. But then secondly, a wig, I veto that. I can't do it. Yeah. But Jacob Hobson has the brilliant idea, hey, what if, Galaxy Brain take incoming, what if her blonde hair has to do with her powers? As in, like, you directly tie that to her powers. You tie that into her story. As far as, hey, natural hair color, okay, cool, black, makes sense for her demographic. But when she uses her powers, then it becomes... Yeah, exactly. Then it becomes highlights. And you know what?
That worked.
That made a whole bunch of sense. It made a whole bunch of sense. And then, here I was looking at Jacob feeling stupid. Like, really?
Me too, honestly.
You, of all people, solved this problem? I'm the writer. I should have been the one to solve this. But
yeah, we almost instantaneously put our differences aside and just agreed on that.
And just said, okay, cool, I guess she gets highlights. Cool, whatever.
Neither of us were budging.
Yeah, that actually happens a lot. Ego clashes, especially on the Discord, where I feel strongly about a situation, he feels strongly about a situation, and of course we have a couple other co-owners. We have a number of freelancers in the Discord. Everybody's voicing off their opinions on things, and yeah, I will say compromising can be difficult. Well, I mean, sometimes depending on the situation, you might just refuse to compromise altogether. Like for instance, me on the front cover for the re-release of the Keepers Volume 1.
That was recent too.
Yeah, that was only like a month ago or so. But basically, I decided to exercise my own creative flair, and as opposed to it being like Vol 1, like abbreviation for Volume 1, or like Volume 1, the word 1 written out, like I had it many, many, many years ago, my first release, I decided, let's say, quote, the first volume. The first volume. And then, the second volume, the third volume, the fourth volume, and then the final volume, which that's years from now. But, we'll get there someday. But I decided, you know what? It's not the title. It's actually not the title at all. The title is The Keepers, and then whatever the subtitle of the volume is. In the case of the first volume, it's The Keepers United Front. That's the actual title of the book. But, anytime I say the first volume, I chalked it up to that's packaging. That's just the packaging.
That's the front cover, man.
I mean, it's not the actual title of the story, of the book, right? But anyway, I was getting at, and Aidan can share more about this if you want to, but how we ferociously clashed over that in the Discord.
Yeah,
let me tell you, it got
days.
nasty, actually.
Yeah, it took a few days. You had to pull up contracts and, say you were the creative... the
creative director.
Creative director, that was the word. It was off the tip of my tongue.
I mean, yeah, basically, that conversation, I will say, it was frustrating, because we had some ego clashes and people felt like, I felt, they felt, a number of people felt, right or wrong, whatever, that they weren't being heard, right, as far as what they had to say and their input. But we decided, well... I drafted up this contract maybe a month ago. It was honestly around that time. Honestly, I think it was that conversation that made me, revisit the old contract from years ago and scrap that and restart. Of course, I brought it to everybody else and we approved it because, it's not binding unless we all approve. So I brought it to everyone's attention for their feedback. But I had a clause in there saying, hey, the original writer for a project is not just its head writer, if there are other writers involved, right? But is also the creative director. Meaning that he or she, or they, because we're inclusive, right? That they retain final rights on all aspects of production and release and marketing, et cetera, et cetera. Because say that you were to pitch a comic book to DC. Not that DC really takes, solicitations like that. I have no idea how you would even get a job at DC, but let's just take them as an example. If you were to pitch a comic book to DC and they were interested, they probably would say, okay, this looks cool and all, but you're going to have to edit this right here. You're going to have to change this right here because this doesn't work. You're going to have to figure something out here.
Yeah.
But, we don't do that.
No, we're very fair, I feel, towards each other. And, I really like the people we got on the Discord right now because they they really are very considerate, and they do their best to make sure everybody stays, relatively sane, to not lose their shit, like Michael just, voicing out like, hey, this is an ego clash, guys, like, it's okay, just tell each other you appreciate, you just hug it out, basically, is what he said. It's really nice to have, such a good group of people that are really supportive, and I'm always going to be expressive of my love, over the whole comic book thing, because this whole group, most of them are full of close friends, and Peyton's the one that started it, so I'm pretty happy that I was able to, get some pals together and be like, all right, we're all in this together, So yeah, that's really nice.
I'll drink my water to that.
Hey, I'll drink my water to that too. I'm very
as opposed to tequila.
Thirsty. By the way, in the last podcast, you mentioned that you were constipated, so I wanted to mention that I've also been constipated. I was constipated a lot of my childhood. You were talking about your trip to Africa, I believe, but yeah.
To Ghana?
To Ghana, yeah. Is that in Africa?
What?
Where is Ghana? Where is Ghana gone?
Did you really... Oh my god. Did you really just ask me that question? Where is Ghana?
Yeah, where is Ghana?
Where do you think Ghana is?
These nuts?
I might edit that out. But yes, you had it right the first time. Africa. That's typically what happens when you second guess yourself. Like, yesterday. Well, okay, it wasn't yesterday. Well, actually, no, I did record it yesterday. But then did I? I think I did.
Podcast?
Yes. I did. Actually, I did record it yesterday.
Oh, really?
And then posted it today. But also, guys, we're recording this in advance. Like, you guys are going to hear this on Thursday, but we're recording this actually on today's. Well, the previous Thursday.
Yeah.
Anyways, I was saying yesterday, so in the last episode, in episode 1, about how Aidan started Kwai Zombie when he was 19. Mm-hmm. And then I second guessed myself. I was like, well, okay, was it maybe 17? I don't know. But I was completely right. I was completely right the first time. Yeah. So you were completely right the first time about trip to Africa, and you were like, wait a second.
It was like you were looking at me like, you're wrong. And I'm like, oh, shit.
I was looking at him like, how was this a question?
Yeah, you're like, for real? But it wasn't at Ghana that I was constipated. I was constipated most of my childhood.
Yeah, because you've never been in Ghana. Why would you ever? You would not make it in Ghana.
No, probably not. Hell, I was constipated fucking last week.
I love how we're talking about bowel movements, or lack thereof.
I feel much better right now, though.
That's funny.
Much better.
That's so funny. We're talking about constipation.
You brought it up in the last episode.
I guess I started it. It's fair game. It's fair game to bring it up now. But wow, we have actually been going at this for 43 minutes, longer than I thought. I thought it'd be like 20. I thought, we'll talk for a nice 20 minutes, and I'll record a monologue, later. And I add the two together, and that's the episode. But I guess we got a whole episode right here. Yeah. Unless you have anything more to share, but
no. Stay tuned. I'll be back. But this whole thing, this was Peyton's idea, so I figured I would just entertain it. And I've never been on a podcast before, so this is my first one.
Now, thank goodness. It was recording, because can you imagine if it weren't? That would be so bad.
One more thing about the art. I figured out, Peyton. What I want the aesthetic to be.
Okay.
Like, to the whole comic universe. You know the original, like, Teen Titans show on Cartoon Network?
I mean, I'm familiar with it. I haven't seen it, but I know what you mean.
That's kind of the art style I'm going for.
Okay.
Because it's Western, but it's also a little influenced by anime. But it kind of marries the two pretty well. It has a very dynamic, color palette and action scenes. I mean, just the whole thing. I need to rewatch it and study it now. Except, I want to diversify the body types. I've been getting that a lot, like, from Grace. Like, diversify the body types and, adequately reflect these cultures. And I'm like, yeah, that's not hard. It's totally easy. And I have literally no idea what I'm doing. But
I mean, to be fair, does anybody know what they're doing?
Probably not. I certainly don't. But yeah,
neither do I.
I'll see you guys next time, and thanks for having me on the podcast, Peyton.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure, and I imagine this will be the first of many times. Like, for instance, one of these days, I'm going to get started on the audiobook. Eventually, I'm going to upload that. We're going to do commentary. Aidan definitely wants to chime in on Wingspan. He definitely has some thoughts.
Every page has, like, a panel to it. Like, I can talk about that. Like, uselessly. Like, all the different ways I had to redo this specific page that I'm redoing.
Or, like, little tidbits that he would add, his own interpretation. Because there's a number of stuff where, he would bring in his own ideas, which are still true to what I wrote, but is his own spin on it, so to speak. I mean, but that's what happens when you do an adaptation. Because technically, my books are the canon. Anything outside of that is technically an adaptation. If you want to be
fan art, man, I mean,
I wouldn't call it fan art. I mean, it's an official release of Volition Comics, but it's like an adaptation of what I wrote. Someday if there's ever a movie adaptation, then I wonder what canon they would go off of, like what I wrote or the comic. I wonder. I mean, but obviously we're just getting started, so we'll see once we're starting Shadelock series and Ambassador, etc., once we're at the team up, once we're at volume 2, etc., as far as how many changes you and all the other artists want to introduce and, areas where you might want to deviate. I guess it remains to be seen because we're still early in the process. But hey, I'm definitely open to seeing, where you guys take it and what ideas you might have. But I will say it does stroke my ego to, as creative directors, say, you know what? This right here I veto. I can't do this. Like, for instance, I mean, this is just an extreme example. This obviously wouldn't happen. No one would actually suggest this. But if Aidan were to come to me and say, hey, hear me out, just hear me out, but Poppy with horns. Wings, Shadelock with a tail. Please. I'll be like, love you, bro, but I can't do it. I can't.
No, it's not going to happen.
Obviously, those are extreme examples, but that just illustrates, certain things, But as long as within the realm of reason, I mean, as far as design choices, I mean, Aidan definitely introduces his own elements to things. I mean, he gave Poppy, he gave her gauntlets, which is a relatively
tiny change.
It's a relatively minor thing, but it's true to the character. And now I honestly can't see the costume without it. But in the last episode, I talked about Cosmo and how much you changed him.
Oh,
and
you had total whiplash when I did that too.
Yeah, I mentioned that in episode 1.
What the hell are you doing to my character?
But no, seriously, that is exactly what Cosmo needed. Now that is the definitive Cosmo, and that inspired me to rewrite his story because I know you're going to say otherwise because you simped for me or my writing. You simped for my writing. Excuse me. You simped for my writing, and you defend it oftentimes even though I criticize it because that's fair. We're always our own worst critic. But the first Cosmo story was shit, absolute dog shit. It was terrible. I
don't remember it that much, to be fair.
Hence, if it wasn't memorable, then it was shit.
But it was a lot of like trippy spiritual stuff. Like there wasn't. I don't remember too much story, but the fact that he did have a wife was kind of jarring.
Yeah, as a monk, come on now. I will say. Now that I've rewritten Cosmo, now that he has a definitive origin story, now that I have a whole arc for him planned out, it's interesting diving into Buddhist and Hindu mythology from my own religious and spiritual background because, I've mentioned I'm Catholic, so that's my understanding of the divine and spirituality and the afterlife and detachment from earthly things, etc. So
that's great.
It's interesting walking that line. But I will say though, like Buddhism is one of those things where I think anybody from any walk of life, any religion or no religion at all, can admire it. Actually, because sure. Even when I was, even when I was an atheist, as a kid, as a teen, I mean, I actually, actually had a lot of adoration for Buddhism. So they have my respect for sure. Also, I love how we said, we were done. Goodbye. And then we just kept going. But okay, I'll give the floor to you for any last thoughts, and then we are done.
My last thought, cheese.
Cheese?
Cheese.
What kind of cheese?
Mozzarella. Pretty good. I'm a mozzarella fan. Okay, well, thanks for having me. See ya.
Okay, see you guys next time.